All right. I hope you are cozy and warm. Hope your bees are cozy and warm. Who's got bees? Everybody got bees? That's a lot of people with bees. Good, cool. If you don't have bees, this is a good place to be. Cool. I do have a little business to take care of before we get started. The Eastern Missouri Beekeepers Club is not the only club out there, for sure. But all of them, are helping the beekeeping community. And I may be a little bit biased, but I think the EMBA is probably the best club in the area. So thank you. Two people think so. That's good. And they all, like I said, they all serve their purpose, and we might be the only club that actually has a membership dues. Now, I've been around for 10 years, and the cost that dues has been $10. Some of you have been here longer than me, and it's always been $10 for individual and $15 for family. But as you know, the cost of everything goes up. I do most of the grocery shopping for my family, and well, me and my wife. And I never like prices going up, but they all do. So you probably see where I'm going with this, right? So we need to raise our membership dues from $10 per individual to $15 per individual, and from $15 for a family to $20 for a family. Now, I'm sure that keeping bees, a membership to a club, is probably the least expensive item on your list. So I hope that the $5 extra a year will not be a major deal for you. But we do think it's necessary to do that at this point. But there are a lot of benefits to being a member of this club. And if you are a member already, that's why you're a member, because you understand the benefits of being in an organization like this. And like I said, one of the better ones, at least in the region. It's been around a long time and doing a lot of good stuff for the beekeeping community. First of all, you get excellent speakers. Thank you. Nationally known speakers. I mean, these people are top notch. We get them in here. We make them feel welcome and at home, and they educate us. So although these are free meetings, nobody has to pay. Anybody can come here, whether you're a member or not. Anybody who comes to one of these meetings is to some extent interested in beekeeping. And I think it will definitely help them and hopefully keep them interested with the quality speakers that we have coming in here. We got this great facility. This is a very nice place, excellent parking, centrally located, and free snacks. So come on. So, all right. Thank you for the applause. We also have activities that are for members only. We have a mentoring program, which is probably one of the biggest benefits of being a member here at EMBA. If you're trying to do beekeeping alone or just from YouTube videos, which a lot of good YouTube videos out there, but if you're trying to do it alone, it's going to be really tough. You need somebody to talk to, which is again one of the benefits of this organization, as well as somebody who you can call, talk about what issues you have, what questions you've got, and get a visit now and then, so somebody can take a look and see what's going on and tell you tell you what you should do or should not do. We also have open apiary at our Danforth yard. Anybody been there to look at the bees? Yeah, not just to cut grass, Jerry. But yeah, so you get hands-on experience looking at a hive with people who know what they're doing and have been doing it a long time. Thanks to Ken Heitkamp and Kate Smith for really taking care of that apiary up there and helping people out. You can be on our swarm list. If we have a swarm list for the members. If there's a swarm and you sign up, you tell everybody what areas you can go to and what you can do. And John or I usually will get a call. Somebody's got a swarm hanging in the tree. I was just told, and I get some of those if they're in the city close to me. And I just got word from Janet that the picture of the swarm I caught was like the most liked picture on Facebook. So how about that? So there are advantages to that. Also, if you want to be do cutouts, removing bees from structures, you can get on a list to be able to do that. So it's a possibility of free bees, a little extra revenue if you want to sell those, that sort of thing. And there's access to our members only content on the website, where we've got a lot of resources, as well as even some of the slide presentations from our speakers at workshops and at these meetings. We also have club picnics, which are free to all members. The club sponsors all of those activities and the food. People do bring their own mead, though, for everybody to taste. So we've got a lot of mead drinkers here. And we have holiday parties. We have the extravaganza, a couple things we do ask a minimal cost from the members, but the club will subsidize the remainder of the additional costs for those activities and other activities. So if you're already a member, you're good to go for the rest of your year until you get the notification to renew. The increase will take effect then the next time that you renew, or whenever your renewal comes up. Now we're going to send out an email for this month. We're going to make this announcement, and after that, once that email goes out, we are going to give about a week or so before that increase takes effect. Because if you aren't here, well, you're here, but if some people aren't here, they might not get the notice soon enough or whatever. So we want to get that out to all the members for sure and let them know. And then if you aren't a member, you can join now for $10 until the email goes out. And then after that grace period comes in. If you are already a member, and this is the time when a lot of people join the club. So you may only have 1 or 2 months remaining on your membership. You could re-up early and then get the $10 for the next year. So you save a little bit of money there, the $5. And then now we're going to talk about nukes. We do have nukes on sale for members only. At a price of $200. So during that time, that again, this grace period, you can join for $10 and get the nuke for $200. Okay, after that grace period is over, we are going to open the sales to non-members, but the price for non-members to purchase a nuke will be $215. Okay, so, but again, if you join after that time, you still get the membership benefits plus the cost of the nuke for being a member. So you might as well just join the club and get the benefits of the club and a very good price on a very good nuke, overwintered nukes here in the region. So where are they from, Tom? Kansas City area? Right, okay. So now if you got any questions on that, that's fine. I understand a lot of stuff. Just see me afterward if you got any questions, and or one of our Tom, Melissa back there, Janet over here, Michael over there. So number of folks here who can help you with any questions that you might have. All right. Cool. I appreciate, believe me, I appreciate your support. I appreciate you being out on semi-inclement weather here, and your interest in beekeeping and the beekeeping community in our club. So we do thank you for your support. All right, announcements. Now I've got announcements. Workshop. I hope you're signed up for the workshop, February 8th, and the banquet on February 7th, Friday. That's right, 8th, 7th, and 8th, yeah. So we've got our speakers lined up. I can run through those real quick for you so you know who the speakers are and what the topics are. I hope you got in early on the early bird pricing, because that went up to first of the year. So what is it, 110 now, right? 110. So for the beginners class, again, we're going to have people from our club, two of whom will be up here this evening talking about mead making, John Pashia and Ken Heitkamp, and also Donna Grabat, who is not here, and Natalie Summers. She was a young lady from the Kansas City area who has been in beekeeping like since she was 9 years old. So she's 17 now or whatever. Had a great presentation. Was she at NABI this year? So she's 2 years at NABI, the North American Bee Expo. So she's going to be joining the beginners speaking group. John Pashia is going to talk about honeybee biology and pests. Natalie is going to be talking about hive components and hive tool and the tools that you need. Donna's going to be talking about acquiring bees, and John and Ken together are going to talk about seasonal management. And Ken is going to talk about extraction and hive products, which I believe was one of the, according to our exit survey, one of the more popular topics. So if this class is for absolute beginners. So if you've got any experience keeping bees, you'll want to go to the experienced class. And so if you got any friends out there, you're trying to get into beekeeping, tell them about this workshop. For the experience, we've got Bob Binney is going to be doing the chemistry behind processing honey. Bob Binney's also going to be talking to us at our banquet the night before, which is at, well, it's at the Holiday Inn in Sunset Hills, which is the Twisted Tree restaurant, which is some really good food. So come and join for that. He's going to be talking about 40 years in beekeeping. So I'm sure there's some pretty good stories we'll hear from him. Corey Stevens, who's been here before, talking to the club. He's going to be talking about cell builders that don't suck. If you rear queens, you'll know a little bit more about what that. If you don't, come to the workshop and learn about what cell builders are. Earl Hoffman, who was also here not too long ago, is going to talk about hive pests. Jim Masucci, actually one of our members, again, regionally, if not nationally known speaker. He's going to be talking about the wonderful world of nukes, how the advantages of actually having a nucleus colony in your own apiary. And then Corey's going to talk again about breeding VSH, which is Varroa sensitive hygienic queens. And then Bob Binney's going to talk in the one joint session that we're going to have. He's going to be talking about the synergistic effects in comb. You can look up synergistic. I did. You guys all know what synergistic is? That's good. Beekeepers are smart, John. Beekeepers are smart. All right. So we are also going to have a lot of good vendors. as well. And Tom, or no, we also, first time, we're going to have a class that's not so much associated with the workshop. It's a whole separate deal. But at the same time, the day before, on the Friday during the day, about learning how to judge honey at honey shows. So this is like level 1 stuff, right? And Melissa's going to come and tell us a little bit about that. Here she comes, making her way up here.
So talking about the Honey Show Training Council, Tom and I and Penelope actually took this class in Illinois back in the fall. It was an amazing class. Like Dan said, it's not actually associated with the workshop. It's a whole separate thing. There's a separate fee for it. And that you'll sign up through the American Honey Show Training Council and pay them separately. But if you have any interest in entering honey shows or becoming a judge, or just want more insight into how honey shows work, how they judge things, this class is really invaluable. It was really helpful. The purpose of the class really is to just educate beekeepers to produce better products, to make you more aware of how your product should look, to make it look the best that it possibly can, so you sell more, right? It was just a really good class. Right now, I think we're 5 signups away from being, we have to have a minimum amount of people to sign up for the class to have it. We need 5 more people to sign up. But it was just a really amazing class. Again, if you have any interest in showing in honey shows or becoming a judge or insights, the class really is invaluable. Speaking of honey shows, because we're having the training council come in and we're hosting this class for them, we're also having a American Honey Show Training Council sanctioned honey show at our workshop. So if you're coming to the workshop, which I know all of you are coming to the workshop, right? You'll be able to enter into the honey show. The first 3 places in each category, ribbons. There are 20 different categories that you can enter. And I just want to say that we have several members in our club that are actually here tonight that regularly enter honey shows. And I just kind of want to give props to them, because several of us went to the North American Honeybee Expo a few weeks ago and entered their honey show, where there were over 1,000 entrants in that honey show alone. So is it okay if I read the list of people in our club that entered and placed and won ribbons? So Michael Godfrey, he won 5th place in amber extracted honey, and he also won 4th place in the beeswax block. Ken Heitkamp, where'd Ken run off to? He's back there in the corner. He won 3rd place in the beeswax blocks, 2nd place in the macro photography, and 5th place for his dry mead. And then Miss Penelope Woodhouse, right here up front, she placed in poetry. I didn't write it down. She placed in poetry. And then she also placed 3rd with her honey cake and 6th with her honey bread. And then you don't need to clap for this one, but I placed 4th with our dark honey, 3rd with our infused bourbon barrel aged honey, 4th with our black and white photography, and 2nd with our scenic photography. So I have to say, like, Penelope, Tom, and I, we took this class. Do you feel that class helped you prepare your honey show? Or at least gave you an insight into what they were looking for?
I had no idea what you did at a honey show, so I definitely was, definitely, if you're gonna compete, you have to take this training to know how to position yourself. Without taking this training, it would be very challenging to compete if you didn't understand. So it's definitely well worth taking if you're interested in competing, because as you said, it's invaluable. If those are your plans, you actually do need to take this to understand what is their judging and how they judge.
Mhm. And the American Honey Show Training Council, they judge differently than like the state honey show does. So like a state honey show, if say the beeswax block category, if only one person enters, that person wins first place. Where the American Honey Show Training Council, it's on a standard. If nobody meets that first place standard, nobody gets a first place ribbon. It's a lot more strict, like you really have to meet those, like it is the best of the best. So for the people that placed on this, that's really significant, like that is the best of the best. And I know Michael is planning on signing up for or you did sign up for the class. So we just have to get Ken Heitkamp to sign up for the class this evening. But anyway, so that's my spiel on the honey show. Oh, and if you're gonna enter, you can start bringing your entries in Friday evening. So you don't have to wait till Saturday and stand in line to enter things. If you're gonna come to the banquet, you can bring your entries to the banquet and sign up for the honey show then. The only other thing that I wanted to push is the license plate. So the license plate information is back there. We're like 40 people away from having B license plates. So if you haven't signed up to get your B license plate, do that. You have to go online and fill this out and pay the fee. And then you also have to fill out this form and send this in or take it to the DMV. I can't remember. So make sure you read all the information. Oh, and also there's t-shirts and sweatshirts and all that fun stuff for sale out there. Oh, from the license plate, 40.
Thank you. All right. And now Tom is going to come talk. We got a lot of vendors, good vendors and good raffle items at the workshop too that you'll want to get involved with that for sure.
So like Dan said, I wish I would have had more time. Melissa was really long-winded there, so I apologize for her long-windedness. She usually makes fun of me, so fair game, right? So the entire board's been working really, really hard this entire year to bring you guys the absolute best of the vendors, speakers, and the entire experience. So, I mean, props to everybody that's on the board. They've all several meetings, several Zoom meetings. I mean, we've really been working really hard at this. So just understand that we don't take this lightly. We want this experience to be really good and well-rounded for everybody, beginners, experience, and the whole 9 yards. So we do have about 18 vendors that are going to be coming here. I'll just rattle off a few and just a few basic things that they carry. So the idea that we had behind it was we don't want to have a lot of overlap. We don't want to have 6 different vendors there all carrying the same product. That doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? We want to have, again, a well-rounded experience when it comes to the equipment that somebody may or may not want to use. So we have first and foremost Isabees, Jane with Isabees. That's our local supply house. And I can tell you from experience and going around the country in different conferences and things like that, we've had many compliments from some really respected people in the bee community saying we've got a really great store right here in the St. Louis area. So I'm a big proponent of small business and supporting local, because if we don't, they won't be here anymore, right? So first of all, Jane from Isabees, very, very talented person. She will be there with a lot of her products, and she carries a wide range of different stuff. Secondly, the EMBA will obviously have a room there selling different products as far as, you know, our swagware, if you will. A guy by the name of Nick with Motherload carrying like frame feeders or division board feeders, makes a really, really good product. I'll say, first off, too, every vendor that's there is kind of somewhat handpicked to be the smaller guy, if you will, and also somebody that really displays really great products. And I can say almost all the vendors that are going to be there, I actually actively use almost all their products. So again, that's something that I feel really strongly about. I wouldn't tell somebody to use a product that I wouldn't use myself. You know, it's a little bit of integrity there. A guy by the name of Matthew with Comfort Pro Suits. He's actually going to be there with a lot of his protective gear, everything from a full suit to jackets to gloves, the whole 9 yards. Strong Microbials, if you're interested in doing any supplemental type feeding, A lot of different research has gone into that. I won't get into all the details, but if you're looking for supplemental feeding type stuff for the bees. John Hill with Hillco, he's another local guy to Illinois. He sells a wide range of products, but he is really got some great deals when it comes to stainless ware, extracting equipment, so on and so forth. I've used a lot of it. I owned a lot of it. Really, really great guy. He'll be bringing some, and there's also pre-orders on the website for some of this stuff. I know Janet's been working pretty tirelessly after Melissa and I got her the information, which wasn't that long ago, actually. So Janet's been doing a really good job of making sure this stuff's been updated. So there are pre-orders available too. So check that out. If you're looking at something, you can get a discount and also be able to pre-order if you're looking for a specific size of a beekeeping gear or anything of that nature. They can kind of cater to you. We're also going to have a non-for-profit organization there called Hives for Heroes. So anybody in here who might be present or past military, a veteran, and or somebody who's been involved with the firefighters, police, you know, our local heroes there. The Hives for Heroes program, I ask you all to look that up. Hives for Heroes, I think it's hivesforheroes.org. They have a really, really great non-for-profit that supports all you men and women who are present and past military veterans. So another great organization that we're going to have there. Nature's Image Farm is another one too that produces a lot of wax dip products as far as our beekeeping woodenware. Something that I really believe in too. And something that we've done here with the club. I don't know if Dan actually mentioned that earlier as a perk. We actually do that here for the club members. So again, another perk from a very, very small cost to be involved in this. If you have new woodenware in the spring, and we'll release that here shortly, probably there about after the conference, an actual date when we're going to start to wax dip woodenware. Again, I don't want to dive off too far on it and take the time away from the guys for the mead thing, but we can talk more about that in the future. So we also have Apame. So if somebody's interested in not a wooden hive setup, but you want something that's more insulated, Apame is probably one of the state-of-the-art hive setups and components that they use there for that specifically. So they're going to be there. Another guy that's local to Sedalia, Golden Bee. His name is Daniel, great guy. I use a lot of his products. He sells frames and some woodenware as well. There's a local gal here, Lori Metz. She actually sells a lot of, Dan, can you help me out with that? I think there's some soaps and lotions.
Right. Lotion bar soaps.
Lotion bars, soap. So a lot of products that you might get from the hive. So again, definitely check her out. She has a lot of great stuff. She was there last year. We'll also have somebody there supplying Be All Plastic. So anybody that needs bottles, things of that nature. Of course, if you're making honey and your bees are doing well, you're going to need this stuff, right? So we also have 21st Bee. So there's a new company that's out there that just debuted in Louisville, Kentucky at the largest honeybee expo here just about a week and a half ago. He's got a new design of frame that he came out with that's pretty spectacular and probably worth a look. We also have a couple more of the MSBA or the Missouri State Beekeepers Association will be there. You know, just kind of an organization showing the different things that they can offer as a state community too. And there's a new company also out there too that we seen debut. I think it was just down at the North American Honeybee Expo. It was called Yes Honey, which is basically a honey flavored soda. So she'll be here kind of talking about her product a little bit and displaying that too. So all these companies that we have coming are actually donating items. So there's a lot of great stuff to be donated. I've got a couple of extractors that have been donated from these companies, queen rearing gear, complete protective gear, some wax dip equipment. There's a lot of stuff that is actually being donated for raffle. So, you know, even though sometimes people might feel like, well, $110 seems like a lot for a class and a conference, there's a lot of value here, not just the education, but discounts, all the raffles that you can potentially win. A couple of these extractors are like $800 value. So there's gonna be a lot of giveaways too. I've been working the last couple of days on the phone, on the internet, and just ringing some of these guys' ears about getting products to us. So they're all obliging and getting us some really cool stuff. So anyway, again, a lot of great value, a lot of great speakers, and there's gonna be a lot of great vendors there as well, supplying all their products and stuff too. So again, this is not something that I would want to miss. I think that's all.
All right, we will get started with our main speakers this evening. John Pashia, Ken Heitkamp, and Michael Godfrey talking about mead making and beer making with honey. So it's all yours, guys.
This mic.
These are probably on too.
Seems like it.
Yeah, that is. Oh, you want a mic, Ken?
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you guys had an opportunity to pick up one of the flyers that were in the back on the table. We're going to kind of review some of the information on those. So we've been making mead probably for, I don't know, 15 years or
I started about 15 years ago.
something like that. I'm sure other people might have also, but we had an opportunity to take a class with Bob Fink, who would host a mead making class in his basement, probably 15 years ago. And as a beekeeper, it was one of those things that I heard of mead, but I didn't know much about it. And I definitely didn't ever see myself making it until I started having a surplus of honey. And then when I had access to the honey, well, then it wasn't that much of a problem to set some aside to explore this as a hobby. I think beekeeping allows you to get involved with mead making and woodworking and candle making and making motion bars. There's all these other hobbies that are kind of that kind of come along with beekeeping if that's something that you want to explore. So hopefully I'm not going to have too much interference here.
Before we start, I want everybody to know that the recipe we use, Bob Finn is a chemist, and that recipe was passed on to him for another beekeeper, so it's been around for a long, long time. It is a very good recipe to start with. You're going to start learning how to make mead. It's not very difficult to do. There's things you have to do at certain times, but it's really not mead can sit. I have mead that sits in carboys for 1 year before it goes into a bottle. Okay. So I just want to let you know that recipe's been around for a long time and it's a very good recipe. So I've tried other ones, but just for regular mead, it's top notch.
Yeah, so unlike beer making, which has Michael will explain a little bit on, from beginning to end, it's a much shorter time period. Wine making takes a while, and like he said, you know, he'll have wine that's kind of finished for a year before it even goes into the bottle or before he decides to do something else with it. And so if you're going to get into mead making, the handout that says bottling the wine has a list of some of the tools and equipment that you would need if you're going to get into mead making. And so quickly going down some of the list, and I won't go over every single thing. Some of this is pretty self-explanatory, but you'll need a primary fermenter. Now, think of that as just a big vessel, whether it's a bucket that you convert, or if you go buy an actual legit primary fermenter, it'll all be determined by the size of your batch and what you're trying to accomplish. So most recipes, I know the recipe that Bob Fink that we'll talk about in a minute, his recipe is a 5-gallon recipe. And so most carboys are a 5-gallon carboy. And so your first fermentation vessel usually is bigger than that, because you're going to have some left over as you transfer it into this carboy after your primary fermentation in the main vessel. And so you have fermentation vessels, you have carboys, you have airlocks to keep the wine or the must that's fermenting free from oxygen or any other contaminants that are outside. That's what airlocks are designed to do. You've got a variety of chemicals, all of which are relatively inexpensive. Most of these chemicals are, you know, less than $5 a container. I was surprised at how cheap some of the equipment is. There's the bottling equipment, the corking equipment that we'll kind of show you in a minute. But as we go down the list, it's primarily your fermentation vessels. There's a hydrometer. Did you have one of those?
Be very careful with these things right there.
A hydrometer will break if you look at it wrong. It's just the glass is so extremely thin, but it looks like a thermometer, but you put it in the must and it gives you your gravity readings. So it's showing you how much fermentable sugars are in the liquid, in the water that you've added here. And so that'll become clear once we get into the recipe. But
And it's
that's
very important to keep a hold of that beginning gravity and your ending gravity, because that's how you can figure out your alcohol. And your mead.
exactly. So I won't go over every single thing on this list, but at the bottom, we have a list of additives. Potassium metabisulfite, diammonium phosphate. Those are sanitizing agents and then yeast nutrients. Honey, when you think of mead, mead is basically fermented honey wine. And so we know that as we harvest our honey, that we want to make sure that the honey is ripe honey, meaning that the moisture content is below 18.6%. If it's higher than that, there's a chance it can ferment. And while we don't want that with our liquid honey, we are trying to get fermentation to start when it comes to making mead. And so we add an excess amount of water with the honey, and we hope that we can get a good fermentation. And we want a fermentation with a yeast strain that will be suitable and provide the flavor profiles that we want in our finished product. There are some natural yeasts that often are found in honey. And so it's important if we start off with everything being as sanitary as possible, that'll make for usually for a successful batch. So everything we touch, all the tools we use, we want to sanitize those. And so the first ingredient there, the potassium metabisulfite, is what we can use to sanitize. You can make a solution up, and the recipe for that is on one of these forms here. I think it's the recipe.
It's called clean flush, I believe that I use. Is you don't have to rinse once you clean your stuff, and it doesn't need to be rinsed out again. It will kill all the yeast in there. It's very easy to use. It's a new one. You really don't see that one out there anymore. But when you go to buy yourself, just ask what you need for your trip. It's a very easy chemical. It's like 3 tablespoons to a gallon of water, and you can sanitize all your stuff with that.
Yep, there's several different products that you can use to sanitize your equipment. So we know that we're going to make mead, and we know we're going to need honey for that. The type of honey you use can impact the flavor profile of your finished product, also the color of your mead. If you use something light like black locust honey, or something much darker like a nice fall honey, that's going to impact the flavor, and it's going to impact the color substantially. So we have water, honey, and yeast to have the most basic mead possible. And so when you have yeast that you're wanting to add, one of the slides should have the Lalvin yeast profiles. If you wanted to look at that just briefly, there are a lot of different yeast options when it comes to making mead. Most of the yeast comes in little packs like this. They're about $1. And that will be enough to make a 5-gallon batch.
So if you look on here, you're starting to look and see if you prefer it dry mead, or you want something that's a little more sweeter, because that could affect what kind of yeast you're going to use. Most of the yeast that I use is that B47. I use that a lot. I do use the K1B116 and the 118 at the end too. Most of those ones at the end are by making a mead that is going to be a little bit carbonated, like champagne, and very bubbly. That's a better yeast to use than the B47.
If you're wanting a high, let's say you're wanting to create a wine or a mead because you have, you've harvested some blackberries out of your garden, and you want to, mix those with the honey. So you just go to your chart and find where your fruits are at, berries, and you would be able to find, use this chart to help you decide which yeast strain will work best for what I'm trying to accomplish. If you're wanting a high alcohol content mead, then you'd want an alcohol tolerance that is very good. And so when you add the yeast to the must, which is your honey and your water and some of your other chemicals, if you choose to put those in there, the yeast is going to consume the sugars that you put in this until one of two things happens. So as it consumes the sugar, it's producing carbon dioxide and it's producing alcohol. And so the carbon dioxide will bubble out of this vessel through an airlock, leaving the alcohol inside until one of two things happens, until it runs out of sugar to ferment. And there's very little residual sugar left in here. And when your wine is finished, you're going to have a very dry wine, or until it continues to consume the sugars and produce alcohol until the alcohol content gets high enough that it's toxic to the yeast itself. And so it kind of just stalls out, or the yeast don't survive in it. And so depending on what you're going after, you can use an alcohol tolerant yeast that's a little higher and get a little bit higher alcohol content if that's what your goal is. So I'll quickly go over the main recipe for 5 gallons, which is the recipe that we talked about that came from Bob Fink. And this is really a step-by-step, kind of recipe for a 5-gallon batch, which would be approximately 25 bottles, 25 full-size, 750 milliliter bottles. And if you're a new beekeeper, you start off the first ingredient, 14 3/4 pounds honey. Well, that's a lot. I mean, there's about 12 pounds to the gallon. So you're setting aside quite a bit of an investment of your honey harvest in the hopes that this all turns out and that you like it. And you're not going to know if you like it for about a year. And so it gets better as it ages. We all know that, generally wine does that to a point. So what was nice about Bob Fink's class was that after he showed you all this, then he opened up some of the bottles that he had. And so you got a chance to taste what he had made. So you would realize quite quickly, either I love it or this is not for me. And I'm not going to invest, 1.5 gallons of my honey on.
They do seeds that are 3 gallon, which I use a lot of when I study the fruit line. So we can cut that down to 3. Some people like 1 gallon, whereas if you put this kind of time into 1 gallon, I would definitely start with 3, because you may get something you really like and you only got a couple bottles of it, it's gone. And like he said, the whole time you're working with this as a lady, every time I go down and check my meat, I'm always drinking it. So you always know what it tastes like and what you need to do to it as it's going along.
Yeah, I mean, everyone does things a little differently. A 5-gallon batch is great. And you can make this standard recipe and then decide later, hey, I want to split this in half. I want to put some of this with some blackberries and let it ferment a little bit longer with some blackberries. And I want to put some cherries in this, or I want to do something different. And you can kind of divide these into smaller vessels. They do make smaller vessels. This was a 2-gallon food grade bucket that I just drilled a hole in, and there's a rubber grommet you can get that goes into the lid, and then you just put your airlock in it. And now you've got a 2-gallon fermentation vessel. So these airlocks are like $1. I mean, all this stuff is relatively cheap. So getting into the recipe here, we've got honey, spring water, and then we're going to test our specific gravity, and that's what this hydrometer is for. And so you would fill this up, and then there's numbers that run all the way up the side of it. And so you're wanting to get a reading. And in this case, it should be 1.090. And so that's really showing you basically, excuse me, the fermentable sugars that you have in this liquid. there could be some wild yeast strains that are in this that you may not want to become active or to take over this fermentation. It could have off flavors. And so you'll see that often that they'll add one of the ingredients in here at the very end. It says here, a quarter teaspoon of potassium metabisulfide as a sanitizing agent for the must. And so once you mix your ingredients in step one, you add that ingredient, stir it up, let it sit until anything that's foreign inside of here can be killed. And then you can add whatever yeast strain that you want to add. In this case, Alauven D47. It's probably what's recommended. That's usually what he uses. Yeah. You'd want to activate your yeast. And Bob had some big elaborate method for keeping the water a certain temperature. And
I can do that. I can do the temperature of the water, what it says on the package, and let it sit for 20 minutes before it goes into my must. Now, once you prepare your primary fermenter with stuff on the top, you're gonna let this sit for a day. You're not gonna put your yeast in until the next day. You're gonna let this sit, get room temperature. You're gonna take an apparatus like this and put it on a grill. And you're gonna mix this must up before you put that yeast in. It puts oxygen into here. It'll get bubbly. And then you put your yeast in. That'll give you a faster fermentation.
in the beginning of fermentation, oxygen is your friend. Towards the end, oxygen becomes your enemy. And the goal is to keep oxygen out of and not exposed to your wine. And that's why carboys have this small neck, is because when you fill this up, you've got such a small surface area there relative to the size of that vessel that you don't have to worry so much about the oxygen. But every time you open that up, you're letting more oxygen in. And so that's one of those things you have to be conscious of. So once you get your yeast activated, basically follow the directions on the yeast, then you would pitch that yeast in. And honey itself doesn't have all the nutrients that the yeast need to really become active. And so you can give some yeast some food, some energizer. And so diammonium phosphate is a nitrogen source that they use to help the yeast. So again, you're just following basic directions here. After 12 hours of fermentation, you add that. After seven days after starting all this, you add some more yeast nutrient, which is the fermate K. And I would say after 7 days, the vigorous fermentation that will be going on in this will start to slow down, and then you'll transfer it into your glass carboy.
I do want to say that you really want to see a vigorous fermentation in these buckets. If you do not see that, these need to be warmed up a little bit. Sometimes I'll put a heating blanket around this and get it about 70 degrees, and you will be surprised on how much quicker that fermentation will go. To really get a decent yeast, you want this fermentation to be done within about the 10 to 12 days, your first fermentation. If it goes any longer or is prolonged, it sort of affects the taste of your mead. So the quicker it's done, the better, but you don't want to get this too hot. About 72 to 75 is the hottest I would get that must before it goes into your carbo. One other thing I just want to say real quickly, a lot of people cannot take any kind of sulfates when they're drinking wine and it's a headache. I made mead for many years and I do not sulfate into my mead. So but this recipe has about 3 places to put sulfite into that mead. I never do that. I've never had a problem with it.
I knew that was going to come up. A lot of that probably is because you're very clean with everything and make sure that everything is, because it doesn't take very much before you're creating an environment ripe for fermentation. And if you have anything contaminating that, then you pop this open one day and realize there's something growing in here that you don't want, and you dump it all down the drain, and you've wasted your time and then your investment of chemicals and honey and everything else.
What's it supposed to look like? How would you know if it was bad?
You're not going to know the taste of it actually.
Really?
Yeah.
And like I said, I am very, very, you really got to make sure everything's clean at all times. I clean all my equipment, everything is always clean. So anytime I'm using my shoes over, I take them upstairs, all that stuff gets cleaned before I use them. All the stuff that we do, the rack things off, all get cleaned 2 or 3 times before I even go in my mead. So everything gets clean. So if you're very clean about that, you don't need to put any solvents in there.
Yeah, I think the recipe, at the very bottom of the recipe, it says there's a sanitizing solution that you mix this potassium metabisulfite with a half a gallon of water. You can split that in a spray bottle, and I just spray all my stuff, all my equipment. Rinse everything out on the inside. All my airlocks have that sanitizing solution in it to provide that barrier for the air going back through. That's usually what I do. And so you're transferring, or what we call racking, the fluid. You're gonna have some yeast and stuff that's settled in the bottom of this, and you're using what they call a racking cane.
You see, this has got a thing in the bottom, so when you get down, I usually hold it in here and watch. You can see the sediment down here, and every time you rack, you wanna just barely get this down. You don't wanna get it into the sediment. You want these to be cleared up every time that you rack. Once you rack the first time, and you come here, it's gonna be more sediment. You're gonna rack this again. I rack mine probably, well, I do a lot of fruit with mine, so I rack mine probably 6 times before they even get into the bottle. Sometimes 7 or 8, just depends on how much pectin gets into the bottom.
So you're gonna have a hose that connects here. You're gonna have a hose that's, let's say, 5 foot long, something like that. And so generally I'll have my mead sitting on a table, and then that'll go on the ground. And I'll gently lower this into the must. And then there's a rubber plunger here. And so it's usually, you go up and then down and then up again, and then it'll start the suction, and it'll start pouring it right down in here. And then you're siphoning it, and it goes down. And so I just kind of, as gently as I can, kind of lower this down as the fluid level is going down. And the goal is you're trying to clarify this a little bit. And so you have a lot of sediment in the bottom, and you're not trying to bring that along. And if you've got, let's say, 6 gallons here, and you've got a 5-gallon carboy, a lot of people will take like a gallon or a half-gallon jug, and they'll have that sitting next to this sanitized. And if there's any leftover, they'll fill up their carboy, and then they'll fill up the next vessel, a smaller vessel, depending on how much is left. Then you dump whatever is left in here, get rid of that. Then this is now your secondary fermentation vessel. The handles that all for these are fantastic, because the last thing you want to do is drop this when it's full of sweet, sugary liquid all over your kitchen.
And I knocked 2 of the other ones out and busted them open, so it can happen. These are really rich.
Yeah, it doesn't take much, and if your hands are wet or damp, and that's awful heavy. So
You will see, because the tubing come out here is clear, you'll start seeing it getting cloudy when you want to stop. When you went too low, because your sediment will start coming up through it. It'll be clear for a long time, and you'll start watching. You're like, okay, I'm done. I can't don't take any more out.
yeah, so I think, yeah, racking and pre-sweetening, no, we racked it. And then after fermentation is complete, it's showing here 4 to 6 weeks. Then you would do another specific gravity reading, where you would take a turkey baster, put some of the must inside the right here, the hydrometer, and you're looking for that reading. And he's done this so many times in this recipe. They've got it down, pretty precise.
So you're gonna fill this up with your must. You're gonna take this thing out of here, and it's gonna float in here, and it's gonna come up, and you're gonna read the reading on the top. On there. Just one thing about that reading, it doesn't have to be exact. That one he had at what, 1.019 or 91. If it goes 1.085 and 1.095, you're fine. You're not gonna get it exactly every time. You don't have to get it exactly. Especially the D47. You basically want a 100-point drop in your meat. You'll see anywhere from about a 93-point to a 100-point drop in your meat. Then you know that the fermentation is probably done.
Yeah.
You're the D47.
And because all honey differs in its moisture content, when you have a recipe that's dealing with honey, and it says 14 3/4 pounds, if it's honey that is, let's say, 17.9%, versus honey that's 15% moisture, well, that's going to affect your initial reading. And so you might have to add a little more water or a little more honey to get that reading where you want it. Add it, stir it up, take another reading if you're worried about getting it as precise as you'd like. So you just follow the steps, clearing the mead, you're gonna wait another 3 weeks. And then there's two basic ways. The way that Bob taught us is option number 2, where there's two ingredients. One of them is called bentonite, and one of them was called sparkleoid. And those are kind of hard to get a hold of nowadays. And so both Ken and I have started using something called dual fine.
This is very easy to use. You know, I use that on the play stuff. This works within 24 hours and it's gonna meet up. One goes in an hour prior to the other one, so you put one of them in, stir it up, the other one in, I think about an hour later. And within 24 hours, it's about it, here's the meat up. Even the meat that has been fruit in it, I had some that done strawberries, it's amazing how they can clear that up and throw it down and stuff.
Yeah, if you guys know what a Blue Moon beer is, kind of real cloudy, it goes from Blue Moon after you put that stuff into Bud Light. I mean, it was like, oh my gosh. I mean, the first time I used it, I was just shocked. That sediment just drops out of it and goes to the bottom, and you're amazed at how clear everything turns out. It's called dual fine.
It was actually on that.
Yeah, it should be listed as option 1.
People said there's 2 places to buy this stuff there, saying it was once in Fenton. We get the name of them, we already know the name of the place in Fenton.
Friar Tuck's.
No, this is actually a warehouse in that my soccer park that sells all this stuff.
Oh.
It's like the St. Louis brewery that's up at Clark at 141 and Clayton Road, it's the other one.
St. Louis wine and beer making.
Yes, they changed it.
Oh, did they?
That's
Okay.
you guys go get changed names.
What's it called?
Very long. And the very long one is that, correct? Yes. In fact, there's one at 141 in Clayton Road, which used to be. Yes, yeah, that's right, because I was just starting to kind of stop.
Steampunk.
Yeah, steampunk.
Back to number 5, and you talk about not putting in potassium metabisulfite in.
Correct.
You're gonna run into 2 risks. One risk is your wine's gonna turn brown. The second risk is it'll lose flavor. So that potassium metabisulfite, yes, some people do have a word that allergy to it. That is so important. I've been making wine 30 years. Without that potassium metabisulfite, your wine's gonna turn brown and you're gonna lose flavor.
I've never had anyone turn around, I don't know about the flavor, I just gonna think that.
Okay, so once you've clarified your mead, then you can wait, and it says here, wait a couple more weeks and then rack your mead off the sediment. And at step number 7, it's asking you again, because you're opening it up and exposing it, you know, it's having you add potassium metabisulfite again, and then add some of the malic acid. And I remember the first time I did this recipe, I thought to myself, gosh, there's a lot of acid. I mean, there's a lot. At the beginning, there's 7 tablespoons and 2 teaspoons of malic acid. And then here at the end, you're adding more. And I thought that can't be right. But it really gives a nice mouthfeel for the wine and really helps just the taste and flavor of it. You would think that it'd be overpowering, but to me, it really works well.
Now, if you did want to use that, I do put oat chips on all mine. So you buy oat chips like this, it gives it that cannon flavor, that would cut that and that malic acid in the mouth at the end. To do this, and I put about 4 ounces into a 5-ounce batch. Yeah, that's in there for about 10 days, and I'll start tasting it and seeing about when I want to pull those out. You just gotta, if you're gonna use oat chips, just make sure you're using them, that you're gonna start tasting it at about day 10, pull them out, and you get a good mouth of trying to wind it out.
So once you've done all the steps, and then you're getting to the point where you're at step 8 and you're going to bottle the mead, he'd mentioned that you can filter. At one point, he bought a wine filter, Bob did, and I don't think he was real jazzed about it.
I do use it on my ones that I put food, it does pick them up,
Okay, yeah.
but I regularly eat with it.
A little more potassium metabisulfite again, and then some citric acid or acid blend. There's actually something that they sell called acid blend. And then he's asking you to put some 2 tablespoons or 4 tablespoons of sugar. That's really this is your last opportunity to taste it and to back sweeten it. If you want it to be a little bit sweeter, this is your last opportunity. One of the things I forgot to mention is potassium sorbate, which is what you add on step 5. And that kind of halts the fermentation so that any future sugars that you put into it won't cause the fermentation to reactivate. You don't want to have added sugars and then cork it and then have one of the bottles pop.
Well, that's
Well,
a
you
good
can't.
question. If I'm gonna make me a mead, I would never put sugar in the mead. Always save some of your original honey. And if you want to batch it at the end, make sure you're using some original honey you can make the mead. That I would never put sugar and all that work into the mead ever.
Yeah. I always thought the same thing, but that was his recipe. And so then you're ready to bottle. Again, this takes quite a while to get to this point of bottling. I brought my floor corker in. There's also a hand corker that you can use. I don't think we've got any empty bottles. I do have an empty bottle. Well, you would have your corks sanitized. I tend to like the synthetic corks. They don't have to have the wine laying on the side, so the cork has contact with the liquid. Got a hand operated cork. I bought, let's see, about $70 is what I spent on that, I don't know, 15 years ago. And I'm going to demonstrate this. I'll pull this up there. So it's got a spring loaded base. You put that in. It holds the bottle. Cork's in right here. The cork goes in the top. And this plunger will push it down. The plunger is adjustable, so you can determine how far you want the cork to go down into the bottle. It's pretty nice. I've never had to use the hand corker. I've always just used that, and I think it's just, it works amazingly. So I always tell people, if you're going to do the mead making and you want to borrow my corker, I usually get use of it one time a year. Dan, matter of fact, tonight I went up my attic to get it, to bring it, and it wasn't there. And I thought, oh my God, where's my corker at? And I called Dan or texted Dan, do you have my corker? He's like, yeah, I'll bring it with me to the meeting. So, yeah, it's one of those pieces of equipment you don't use very often, but unless you're making a lot of mead. And so once it's bottled or you're bottling it, did you bring your wand? This is another great piece of equipment. This is like a bottling wand. And so it has like a spring loaded little tip on the bottom that when you lift up on it, it closes the flow of liquid out of this wand. And so when you're bottling, you have your hose from your racking cane connected, the other end's connected to this. And so you would raise and lower it to create the siphon, and you have to have an assistant more often than not holding down on this to relieve the pressure so that it will allow the liquid to go in. And so I had my wife or somebody holding this into the bottle as I'm bottling it. And as the fluid gets to the very top, if I lift up on it and stop, the volume of liquid that's displaced whenever I remove this drops the fluid level down perfectly so that when you cork it.
Yeah, it comes out perfect like that when you do it, so it's a perfect system to the cork,
Yeah,
eats that.
so when you take this out, it allows you to then move this over to your next bottle, and as soon as you push it down to the bottom, the flow starts again. And so this is again, one of those pieces of equipment that, while not absolutely necessary, it sure makes it a lot easier to do. All right, and then the last two recipes, or the last two forms, just have some recipes and just some information about other options. So when we think of mead, we think of basically honey, water, yeast. And when you start adding other, let me stop a second. The Complete Mead Maker by Ken Schramm is probably the best book on mead making. If you decide you're going to get into mead making, I've got 4 or 5 books up here, but by far that is the best book, in my opinion, on mead making. There's tons of recipes to try when it comes to looking at these are just 1 gallon recipes. You'll often see black tea listed as an ingredient, and that's to give some mouthfeel and some tannin to the wine. The Viking blood is something that I've made several times, and I will say that if you're using cherry juice, you want to use tart cherry juice, not sweet cherry juice. Sweet cherry juice gives you a flavor of like Robitussin, and tart cherry juice really gives a nice cherry flavor when it's all finished off. That was one that I made that I was really pleased with. And one of the last sheet has kind of a holiday Christmas methomel. So if you add fruit to a mead, it's called a mellomel. And if you add spices, it's called a metheglin. And so if you add fruit and spices, then it's called a methomel. And so that's what this would be kind of classified as, because you're adding raisins and orange juice and cinnamon and cloves, nutmeg. And it really turns out to be a nice wine for sitting around a campfire in the winter or something like that. It's really, to me, I was really pleased. I only had 1 bottle left. I brought it just to show, but that's the bottle closest to me. Anything else you wanted to add?
I mean, the only thing that I started to do a little bit different is I do a lot of fruit meats. So I'll make my standard meat recipe, and I'll let that meat sit in a carboy like that till my fruit comes in. Once the fruit comes in, like for a blackberry, I use about 5 pounds of fresh blackberries. I do warm those up and heat and crush those down. But then everything goes in the fermenter. I have not killed my yeast in here yet. They go back into here with my fruit, and I will let them start what's called a second fermentation. And I will let them go through. Usually when I do that, I don't get it's quick. The fermentations I did on my first one, because the yeast that's in there has to come back alive because they have much sugar in there, they'll come back alive. And it probably takes about 14 days to 20 days for that other fermentation to get done. Then I let it sit because it will really build up out there. When you start using fruit, you need about that much sediment on the bottom. And then I start backing it off. And of course, tasting it as you're going, seeing if you know what you really do. I have my own chips that just run through that, and let them sit. And like I said, every time you get into it, you just taste a little bit of it. See, one thing I do want to say though, even when you're making these, that's why you want gallon jars or liter jars. You want to keep those there as high as possible. You don't want any air in bottles. So instead you have enough for 5 gallons, I'm going to do a 3 gallon. That's why it's important to have like a liter bottle, a gallon bottle, because you can always need, once you wrap this off, you need some more to fill it back up. So that's why it's important to keep everything you have when you make that.
I've even seen people take glass marbles and sanitize them, and if the fluid level is not where they want it, they just add glass marbles to it, and that brings the fluid level up so that it's as close, up here to the smaller portion of the neck. If you're using fruit, I often find that if you freeze the fruit first and then thaw it, that it really ruptures a lot of the cells in the fruit, like blackberries and stuff like that. if you've ever frozen a bag of blackberries, when you take it out and it thaws, there's all this juice in the bottom of the bag. And so that just helps kind of, open up some of the pores, I guess, of the fruit and allows those sugars and the flavors to kind of get into your batch. But really, I mean, there's so many recipes. This other book on the right, Making Wild Wines, I think it's called. My gosh, there's, just 100 recipes for using everything you would never think about using for making wine, onions and garlic, and not necessarily wines to drink, but wines you might want to cook with or something you might want to use for sauces and stuff like that. So there's a lot of great ideas, but you just have to keep an eye. Anytime you're using an airlock, life gets busy. It's important that this airlock has liquid in it, because once it dries, which happens if you neglect your wine for many, many months, you'll go down and find that you've ruined a lot of wine and you have to dump it out because you let your airlocks dry up. And so, as someone who's done that a couple times, it's important to just take 5 minutes and go check your wine and make sure that your airlock is full. Anything else you can think of before we get Michael? Anybody have any questions or?
When I am done with these sit like this for about 24 hours and then I do they all like this. So I use natural stuff. I don't use the that, so that keeps the corn moist there, keeps them in there when they're stored.
It seems like no matter how long I would let them last or let them rest, when I would rack them over to final bottle, not every recipe, but a lot of recipes, you'd have sediment and it would just aggravate me to death. And we would do wine tastings later on and you would have this, just a little bit of sediment. And so what I would do is before we opened them up and people showed up, I would just shake it a couple times. Then whenever you set it out, nobody knows. So.
And I will say, we, like this actually means the better thing. We have a mead where you're not drinking that 35-year-old mead.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. A lot of 35-year-old mead was just unbelievable. You wouldn't have thought it would be say good, but actually in a lot of mine that are 9, 10 years old.
I found some that I had before I came looking for a bottle, and I had some from 2010 and a couple from a few years before that when I first started doing it. I'll open them one of these days.
But the good ones never last long. Say that.
No,
They never stick around.
no. So the small batches are nice if you just want to try something. If you don't want to invest, 15, pounds of honey in a 5-gallon batch on something you may or may not like. I will often just have 3 or 4 different little small batches. And if it's really good and you think, okay, this is worth upscaling to something that I think, will be a crowd pleaser. So.
Do you ever strain it like through sheet spot, get rid of the sun?
No, I mean, if you're talking like super fine. I mean, it's so fine that whenever you do this a time or two, then you don't see anything. So it's just almost like a heavier weighted fluid that's kind of in there that when you shake it, it's kind of hard to explain, but it doesn't happen all the time, but you'll occasionally see
And
that.
I will say, there's a lot of different wild things you can get through Missouri. This actually, my pawpaw, these pawpaws come from southern Missouri. I get them this last fall and took those made mead. This is a wild grape, which is very good also. I just picked a bunch of persimmons this year. I'm doing persimmon. So I mean, once you start doing it, just have some fun. There's a lot of things happening with the make meats, but believe it or not, it tastes great. So
Yeah.
I was wondering if you've ever tried freeze-dried food.
I am not.
I haven't. The question was, have we ever tried freeze-dried fruit? I have not.
I'd like to try to get any of my stuff local. I mean, I do get cherries from North Michigan that are tart cherries. As soon as they come in season, I get them shipped to me that I use. A tart cherry makes a delicious mead. You can get a whole tart cherry. Also, you can get a hold of red Haven peaches. Red Haven peaches with a little bit of ginger in it makes a killer mead. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, and when you're bottling, I brought a little bottle. So we're all familiar with the 750 standard size bottle, but they do have a 375. So if you're bottling let's say you're the only one who's gonna wanna drink this, and you don't wanna have to open up a full size bottle, that's something you can think about. Maybe bottling into smaller bottles. They make, good gifts.
Ken Schramm has one this side, it's called the Love Darkness, is that what that
Yeah,
is
something
all?
like that.
And I believe it's a $200 bottle.
Wow.
So if you look him up, he's got a place out in Michigan. He has all different kinds of needs and they're online, you can purchase some of them. They're quite expensive.
Yeah. And I think when he came into town, so several years ago, Jane Sumi at Isabee's organized an event, and Ken Schramm, I don't remember the other guy's name, who was,
But they were buddies at one time.
yeah, he had done research where they they go into archaeological ruins and find pottery, and there's residue left over from some beer or something, and he was doing research on what, these ancient beers and drinks were made of. And I remember he had brought some of these bottles and they were doing a tasting, and someone must have grabbed his like $200 bottle of the Heart of Darkness or something and was opening that. I remember him being, he was not happy. Yeah. And if you're a woodworker, this is just a quick little jig that I made. If you want to put to me, some of the fun of making wine is making a label. And then when you get a label, you want it to be uniform across your whole batch and make sure that's straight and put on the same height. And so that's just a 2x4. Take two of them together and get a hole saw, measure your bottle and get a hole saw and cut it out. And so when I put this, that's probably, I don't know if I'm used to it, but if you put that on there, then you apply your label. Or if you flip it over on the smaller, then you can line your labels up so that all of them go on straight, even with the board, and then so they're all at the same height. That's just, you don't have to use that. You don't have to make a label. You can put it on a Sharpie if you want.
So is mead like wine where like you open up and kind of use it right away, or is it like whiskey? Where you can
No, yeah, you'd want to use it, pretty quick.
flatten?
I would say that,
I'd say within 2 days, but
yeah. Okay.
What happens after 2 or 3 days?
it is gonna affect the way it tastes a little bit. It is gonna affect it. Believe me, if you start making meat like that, it doesn't take much to bring a problem, perhaps.
You know, the alcohol.
Most of mine run, now once you put through with them, so it really, almost by the pound of honey, usually for 14 pounds, and you use the right mix together, right, they come out at 14%. 13%. Once you start adding fruits, that mine mostly run around 12 to 12 and a half. Is what they are. But and of course, the yeast you use will make a difference. You can make yeast, you can get 17%.
Like I said, it's really high, it shouldn't flatten.
Well, I never made it really that. It's a little. Oh,
Yeah. And before we bring Michael up to talk about beer, the recipe here is for what I would say is a semi-sweet mead. And so you can add more honey if you are a person who likes really sweet wine. You can add more honey and achieve that. And if you are someone who really likes dry wine, then maybe you experiment and tone down, the amount of the sugars that you're adding to it in order to get what you're looking for. But generally speaking, 3 pounds of honey per gallon of water is kind of like the standard for like a semi-sweet wine. So depending on, again, what your personal preferences are.
You can always backfill with honey at the end. If you want it sweeter, and you want it sweeter at the very end, bottle it, backfill it with some honey. Don't use sugar, please, use honey. That's why I always save some honey that you use it. Like I said, you said like honey. Take the honey, don't make the mead with the honey that you don't like. If you like that honey, that's what you would make it good. Say you got somebody gave you a bunch of honey, and it was a dark honey, and it's a very different taste to it. You really don't want to waste your time to make a mead with that, 'cause you're probably not gonna like it.
And having said that, I would say that the meads that I've enjoyed myself, the darker the honey, I did 2 recipes that were small. one using the lightest honey I could find, which was black locust, and then Bob Graham gave me some dark honey, it was like molasses. And I took some and made the exact same recipe, everything done the same way, every step the same. And when I tasted both of them, by far I enjoyed the darker honey mead.
In a darker honey, it's gonna be more floral, anyways, they have more floral complexity to it. That's probably why I consider, I mean, I'm used to it with the darker honey, but it's still honey, yeah.
Exactly, yeah,
You know, it still has a good taste. It's not a crop taste.
okay. Michael,
We are going at the end, we are going to raffle off some of the stuff. We have quite a bit of stuff up here we're gonna give away as a raffle for, making mead. We have a hydrometer and that kind of stuff in it. It's got a belt in there to put around the bottles if you need to up the temperature. It's got the, so there's an apparatus that fits on a faucet. So when you sanitize and clean all your bottles and turn this over, and then in that bag, and believe it or not, $30. It hooks to your faucet, this faucet, and you push out and clean. It shoots water over these and cleans these out.
okay.
All right, this is gonna be a tough one to follow. But I'll try to make it quick and interesting. A few years back, I had a chance to go down to Urban Chestnut and help out with a class that was being taught. And they had brought some people in all across the country, and they were making, doing a class on mead as well as beer. And I don't know if you see that and see the colors, but I don't think if you see anywhere on mead, there's B involved with mead. But with beer, you cannot spell beer without mead. So that's my favorite hat. I don't wear hats, but that is my favorite hat. And I never, as long as I've been drinking beer, maybe 8 years old, 6, I never had noticed that B was part of beer. So that's kind of a neat little thing here. My name is Michael Godfrey, and I am one of these weird beekeepers that I entered the hobby because I needed honey. And I needed honey to make beer. And I don't really like honey, but I needed honey to make beer. And so I shouldn't be telling you that I don't like honey. I like the lighter stuff. The darker stuff to me has what I call a honey flavor. I have no other way of describing honey, but I do like the lighter honey. Let me grab my, we can have many slides. And if I move the microphone away from my mouth, just yell at me. My joy of beer making started as a kid. I had a father who liked beverages, and we were his little go-getters. So we would go get a beer, and we could ask if we could get a sip. Then we get yelled at and told them, go get another beer. This time, no sip, because half of it was gone. And so between that and watching the Stooges make beer, I always had a little fondness for doing it. One of the things I didn't leave in this slide is bottling. And even the Stooges showed you that bottling sucks. Bottling is a process that doing 25 bottles of mead isn't that bad, still sucks. But doing hundreds of bottles of beer, keeping those bottles clean, keeping them sanitized, that kind of sucks. So there's other ways to get around it, but if you want to, give it to people, you've always got to find a way to put some in a bottle. Let's go the other way. The nice thing about any alcohol, it all basically goes through the same process. And I don't know if there's any other way to make alcohol other than fermentation, but it's basically any alcohol is a water, a sugar, and a yeast. Beer brings in hops. And if you look at mead, we're using honey as our sugar. If you're looking at wine, we're looking at grape juice as our sugar. When you get into whiskeys and that, it's grains, it's corn. Beer uses different types of grains. I use a wheat, you can use two-row barley, there's rye, you can do so many different types of grains. And with those grains, there's roasting. So you can get a darker beer, lighter beers, and you can sometimes get a dark beer with a light taste, depending on how you did the roast. And so that's kind of neat. So basically, it all starts with your grain. And I can jump ahead real quick to show you if I go the right way. So what I'll do right here is I start out with my grains and I'll crush them. And so at the same time, I'm starting my strike water. And this is basically just boiling water. One thing you'll see in beer making is if you can cook, you can make beer. It's not a little chemistry set. You don't have to, most of your time is in the first day, first few hours of when you're doing this. So my process sometimes is a 2 or a full day process because I'll do 2 batches and I'll do 1 batch and then start a second batch right after that. So basically you'll mill your grains down. You'll take the strike water and you'll put them in a mash tun. So basically what this is doing is it's taking the water and the sugar at a certain temperature and you're holding it at that temperature. And you're basically starting to convert the starches in the grains into sugars. So once you get that process, what happened to that picture? Okay, once you get that process, I'll let that go about 90 minutes. And then I will take more water. And basically, if you're, I don't know what happened to my picture here, and a bunch of my pictures turned sideways. You can see here, there's a cooler up on a chair. And then there's another cooler on the counter. And then what I'm doing here is I'm taking the warm water, rinsing the grains that are in this cooler here. And then from that, my sugar water is basically coming into this pot. So once you get your sugar water, now this is a all grain process. If you're buying a kit, you'll get basically a bag of was it DME, but it's basically malt extract. So someone else has taken this process and done it for you and basically giving you basically a powdered sugar, but it's basically from a grain. There's liquids that you can buy as well. There's so many different processes. And that's the one nice thing that I love about beer brewing is when you get down to it, you can go from an extremely simple setup to a gravity fed system, to a system over here that uses pumps and does a lot of the work for you, to a home kind of a system that takes all the fun out of it. And basically you put the ingredients in, it's kind of like a remedy. In the morning, you know, you're ready to go. And then here was a time where John got us a tour at Schlafly and we went down and you can kind of see what future of my garage might look like. No way can I get those down the basement, but yes, the garage maybe. So back to the process. Once you've got your sugar water, you start to boil. Now, the neat thing about beer is there are so many different hops. There's so many, you know, you'll have an aroma hop and a bittering hop. The bittering hops will go in first, and that gives you your bitter flavor. And then the aroma hops go in later in the boil, and that's where you get your flavor and your smell from, basically, that doesn't boil off with the hops. Some of the hops can be used for both of those process. Some of them only can be used for bittering, and some of them can only be for aroma. I had the chance of, when I make beer, sometimes I might have a beverage while I'm making beer. It's kind of a rule. And one time I switched 2 of my hops. Now, sometimes I could make a drastic change, but it took a beer that I had that I felt was a little sweet and kicked it over onto the bitter side. And now That's my standard way of making that. The one beer that I love to make is a citrus wheat. I started out making lager beers. That's a little different process where you use temperature to lager it in a longer time. So many people were telling me, hey, why are you doing that? That's ridiculous. Go to ales. You can be drinking beer in 2 weeks. My first batch of beer that I made in the lager was supposed to be maybe 20 days, 30 days. I was probably drinking it too early at probably 15 days. I cannot wait for 2 years or a year. So mead is not in my picture. I've made mead before, but it went to a distillation process after that, and we won't talk about that. So once you got the boil, and once you've done your hops, and like I said, there'll be stages that you'll put in the hops in the beginning, hops later on. Then you'll rack into the same type of carboy that John and Ken were showing. Now, again, you can get crazy and buy a couple of these stainless steel fermenters, which are about an 8-gallon, 7-gallon, which I did that because I was tired of messing with the glass bottles. It's hard to get your arm into that little hole to clean it, which unless you've got baby arms or some genetic feature, you're not going to do, and you're going to be doing it with a brush. It's easy to do. John does it a lot. I just got tired of doing that. I was getting ready to go to the big carboy, big mouth, and then I saw these and I'm like, I'm in. So I use those now as my fermentation, but that was a picture when I first started. And you can see again where I'm using a chair to prop it up. And at this time, this one I believe is not being racked. This is, instead of using what John had, one of these, those are very nice. Again, they can dry out. So I started using, plus I dry hop. And when you dry hop, you put hops in after the fermentation. So it's the bittering hops, the aroma hops, and then I'm putting a third set of hops in during the fermentation process. Well, that can cause a big issue if that plugs up the hole. And during fermentation, that'll rise up and sometimes push the hops up. You can use a hop bag to keep them in, but on these processes I didn't. And when that hole plugs up and you come home and you see it ready to explode, and you run into the room to sanitize a new one and come back out and it's exploded onto your ceiling, it leaves a creamy like gack. And it smells like an old fraternity that's had beer on the floor for weeks. It's not something you want spread across your kitchen. I'm not married, so I can get away with that. One of the things that on this next picture down here, I don't, what the heck, draw on that picture. I wish I could see that. Down on here on this picture, I am basically using the old soda kegs. And those are called Cornelius kegs, and they were made by Cornelius Manufacturing. And a lot of people call them corny kegs. And that was something that, again, you can put it in a keg, you can open up the top, you can get in there and clean it. It's really nice because I can force carbonate. Naturally, you want to put, I had trouble making beer, and in the kits came this corn sugar. And corn sugar is used to get the carbonation. So once the fermentation is done and you're fermenting with a fermentable sugar, the corn sugars aren't fermentable, but what they will produce is gas. And so that's where you get your CO2. So some of the breweries will take, when it's fermenting here, they will capture that gas and reuse that, reintroduce that back into the back in. Some of them do it in a natural way. The kits all came with corn sugar, and I didn't really want to put corn sugar in, so I went with kind of forced carbonation. So I switched the tubes around, basically pump CO2 into it, and I can fill that keg up in maybe 2 hours of me shaking it and carbonating it. I can be possibly drinking that. So I like to look at ways that I can get to my final result quicker because I don't have a year to waste. I still can't produce enough beer for myself because then I still don't have the time. One of the, like I said, one of the things down here, you always need to have a little beer while you're producing. I don't believe in not tasting your products. Man, all my pictures went wonky. Oh, I think it's this, okay, never mind. The basic ingredients, you'll see your grains, and like I said, if you're gonna do kits, I started out doing a kit, and the kits are perfect. They're real simple, they're real easy, they're real easy to follow, all the ingredients are there. You don't really have to do anything above and beyond. I got into all grain brewing, so basically I'm taking the grains, and here there's probably hit the red button, Mike. There's probably wheat in here. Here's some of my there's my yeast. That might be White Labs. No, White Labs is that might be white yeast. White yeast are these nice little smack packages. I've used the dry yeast that a lot of the mead makers do, and you have to warm it up, process it, getting the yeast going. What these have is inside the bag, there's a little nutrients bag, and when you smack it, it releases it, and you'll see the bag puff up and you'll know everything's starting to work. Really nice, really nice. I haven't had any issues with those. Another company used to do little vials. I've had issues sometimes getting those in the summertime, and it kills off the yeast if they get too hot. That's the nice thing about having St. Louis Wine and Beer, which we said is Steampunk Brewery, as well as the malt guy down in Fenton, that you can get your yeast local and you don't have to worry about shipping them in cold temperatures and that. One thing you will find out is you do want certain temperatures. So when you have, like, when it's cooler, sometimes I'll keep the beer upstairs for fermentation. During the summer, putting it down the basement works out perfect. I'm not married, so I can get by with doing a lot of these things in my kitchen. I extract in my kitchen. I do, most of the things in the house. You do have to watch when you are boiling, as you can see, I'm right here in my kitchen. You do have to watch that if you're boiling a lot and the temperature outside and maybe you open up a door, you can get kind of a sticky condensation on your walls. And so you always want to have ventilation. A lot of people, again, do this outside. My process takes a little bit longer on my stove, whereas some of the people use the outside propane tanks that you can fire up and get a boil going in 10 minutes. Let's see if there's anything else I'm missing. And yeah, back to the basic, here is the simple process. And a lot of it is like, it's the same for most things that you're gonna go through. They don't have to do the cooking, what I call the boiling and all that process, but the fermentation and the bottling is basically the same thing. And a lot of the equipment is the same. You'll find that some of the hydrometers will be a little different because beer, wine, and even hard alcohol will have a little different measurement on those. So you always want to make sure that you've got the right equipment or the right things for it. See if there's anything else I'm missing.
Where does honey come into play?
Now, that is the key. In the process, and that's where I think one of my pictures was up here. In the process, because honey, you don't want to heat it. There's two schools of thought, and the one that the guy that I read that was back in the day, I don't know if it was the early 1900s, that really looked into doing honey and the science of adding it into beer. He would take it and basically sanitize the honey. So he would put it in a pan in the oven, slowly raise it up, and I forgot what the temperature was. It might have been like 145, but he would raise it up to that temperature. So it's killing anything that's in the honey that you don't want, but not destroying the flavor, the nutrients and things like that. So he would add it once you've boiled the beer. and you've put it into your fermentation, he would add it at that point. What I do is once I stop boiling and I shut the boil off, I add it at that point. And so it basically, I don't do the sanitizing, so I'll just dump the honey in there. It takes some of the flavor out and maybe you lose some of the nutrients because of that higher temperature. But it's just an easier process than doing a pan, letting it cool. Cause I've always been concerned with, as you let it cool, is anything else getting into it at that point? Or if you put it in there and don't let it cool, now you have to let the fermentate, you have to let everything cool before you can add the yeast. So you have to add the yeast at around, I believe, 70 to 72 degrees. If it's too hot, that can hurt it. If it's too cold, that can hurt it. So you want a little window. So I found it's easier to do it at this point. One of the things I don't show is at this point, when you're done with the boil, and maybe one of these pictures had it, you will basically cool it. So I have a copper coil that I'll run cold water through. And you put that, again, I put that 15 minutes in before the end of the boil, so it sanitizes that. Again, what John and Ken said, sanitation is a big thing. You wanna I was so crazy in the beginning that I would sanitize my boiling pot. Now, you might say, well, what's wrong with that? You're at 212 degrees, you're gonna kill everything at that point. So there's really no reason to sanitize. But anytime you stir anything at any point after the boil, everything needs to be sanitized. So I would sanitize all my car, I would spend probably an hour to 2 hours beforehand going through sanitizing everything, having that all set on a table drying, and then I start the process. Like earlier on in the process, when you're doing this, none of that needs to be sanitized. You can clean it good, but you don't have to get the sanitation at that point, because once you get to the boil. But like I said, anything that you put in there, anything that you stir, anything later on, the tubing, the stoppers, when I do my carboys, I sanitize those, my little Cornelius kegs, and it's just a neat process. These are really neat. You can get really cheap adapters. So I converted my kegerator over, took off the sand key, which is the normal one that goes into a keg and twist and turn, to gas in and liquid out. And they're real nice click-on connectors that make it a lot easier. Plus these fit in the little refrigerators a lot easier. I can transport those with a little cooler I've got and take it to places. So I think that's the basis of it. Like I said, when I was doing the kits, they were basically set up for 5%. I started adding 1.5 pounds to 3 pounds of honey to a batch, and I can take it to 7 to 9%. You want to watch going over like 9%. Like Ken was saying, with some of the meads, it can start to get that alcohol taste. Tastes like a Boilermaker or something like that. But I like it because I like a stronger beer. I don't have to have, if I ever have too many, but I don't have to have a 6-pack of beer. I could come home and have one beer and be where I want to be and not have to have 5 more. Some people don't like a stronger beer. I do. One of the other things I've started to have a bigger fascination with is the hops. Hops give you that. Hops are for preservation, and you'll hear of an IPA, which is an Indian Pale Ale, or India Pale Ale. When I first read about that, I thought it was an Indian beer. But it's got Indian Pale Ale in it. It was the British beer that they were transporting with the ships, and they had to get to India, and as they needed a beer that would get there. So they figured out different things to preserve it, and hops was one of them. Hops are neat because they also can add flavor and just all across the board. So when I was saying earlier that I have a honey wheat citrus, the citrus comes from the hop. There's no citrus, there's no grapefruit, there's none of that added. It all comes from the hop. You can get clove flavors, banana flavors. Hops are really neat, and like I said, there's so many of them out there. They're like flowers, they're crisscrossing them. It's all kind of pretty neat. And I think I'm getting the old hook telling me to go, and you always need a label. So when I established my brewery, which was at home and nothing else, me and the dog, 2006, I think I had a label before I actually had my first beer, but my Dalmatian is no longer with me, but I have 3 others now. But yeah, that's Jerk Dog Spotted Dog Brewery. And as you saw, there's Jerk Dog's Wildflower Honey that goes into it. And one thing real quick on the hops, you can get pellet hops or you can get real flower hops. Pellet hops are nice because they're a little more concentrated, but they can clog up filters. And so that's one of the things when you're racking and things like that, that you do have to watch about filtration. Any questions? You can see me in the back. Unless we have time, but we gotta go real quick.
Yeah, we got, you wanna draw? What are we raffling here? What's going, we got a bottle of mead, 2 bottles of mead?
And,
Okay, here's for what? What do you wanna do first? Save the best for last. That,
Then. Let's see some chemicals that go with that.
What's first?
That goes in this.
Yeah.
Do 3 bottles of mead.
2 bottles, 3 bottles of mead?
2 of the big ones that are Ken's, and the little one was one I brought.
Okay, we got 3 bottles of mead.
First bottle of mead.
They can pick whatever.
It is 6873072. Michael Kilfoy's a winner.
Check his ticket.
Take your pick. Second bottle of mead. The last 4 numbers, 3070. That's Laura Powell's. And the third bottle of mead is 3075. That's Jerry. All right, well, thank you all for making it here tonight. Appreciate the guys making the presentations. Ken's got a comment.
Oh,
One more.
all the bag of
What is
stuff.
that? Bottle dryer?
hydrometer, it's got a lot of stuff in it that was given to us, so we're gonna bottle brush, everything we had sitting on us.
All at one time?
Got all of them.
All at one time. $3077. Great, Joe, I think, Joe, is that the name?
And also a round of applause.
Oh,
Yeah, great job, good job, appreciate it. Okay, sign up for the workshop. For sure. Okay, fine, have a great evening, be careful out there.